All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really interesting topic. We're looking at how one organization in Indonesia is fighting poverty, but not in like the typical way you might think.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, so we're diving into this research proposal. It's about an organization called LAZSMU Makassar. And
Oh, interesting. I've
yeah,
heard of them.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like an early look into how academics are starting to study this group. It's not a full-blown report or anything, but it gives us a taste of what they're all about.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And what I found really cool is that they're all about empowering communities to like actually break free from poverty, not just like putting a Band-Aid on the problem.
Yeah, and that's what's so intriguing about Lazismu Makassar. They don't just offer handouts like a lot of charities.
Right.
They've got this whole strategy that they call Dakwah by action.
Okay, Dakwah by action. I like that.
Yeah, it's about putting your faith into action. It's about bringing about real change in the world, not just preaching about it.
I love that. It's like what is it? Put your money where your mouth is or something like that, but for good deeds.
Exactly.
So how does this Dakwah by action thing actually like play out? What makes it different from like, your typical Western charity?
Well, to really get Dakwah, I think we need to go back to the source. The Quran, chapter 3, verse 104, talks about the duty that Muslims have
Okay.
to encourage good and discourage wrong. And it's not just a suggestion, it's a core principle.
It's baked right into their belief system, this idea that you can't just talk about helping, you got to actually do it.
You got it.
Yeah.
And Lazizio Sum Makassar, they're putting this into practice by focusing on three key areas: bolstering people's economic prospects, supporting their health, and providing access to education.
The trifecta.
Yeah, they call them the three pillars of empowerment, and they're all intertwined with this Dakwah by action idea.
Okay, let's break down those pillars because I think most people can wrap their heads around the economic empowerment part, like helping people become, financially stable.
Right.
But I'm curious about how this Dakwah element makes their approach unique.
Just imagine you're struggling to make ends meet,
Yeah.
and you get a microloan from a Lazismu Makassar. That's already huge.
Huge, yeah.
But then they also connect you with workshops on Islamic business practices. So you're not just learning how to manage money, but you're learning how to do it ethically.
It's like they're giving you the tools and Andy the moral compass all at the same time. That's powerful.
It is.
Now, what about the health initiatives? Because the research proposal, it's a bit vague on that.
Right. It just kind of mentions health programs.
Yeah.
But I mean, based on what I know about the region, they're probably doing things like setting up mobile clinics, doing health education workshops, especially for mothers.
Which makes sense, right? If you're constantly sick, it's hard to work, it's hard to focus on anything else.
You can't break the cycle of poverty if you're not healthy.
It's all connected.
Exactly. It's a holistic approach.
Yeah.
And it gets even more interesting. Remember we talked about Ibn Sabil, which traditionally refers to travelers in need.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Laziest MAU, they've actually expanded that concept to include students who are struggling to afford education.
So they're like, hey, these kids are on a journey for knowledge. They need our help too. That's a beautiful interpretation.
It really is. And it just highlights how they're weaving faith into every aspect of their work.
Okay, so we've got these three pillars: economic empowerment, health initiatives, education, all infused with the spirit of Dakwah by action.
Right.
But what kind of tangible results are they seeing? Like, are people's lives actually changing because of this?
That's what's so fascinating about this research proposal. It's offering us like a sneak peek into the early stages of studying Lazismu Makassar's impact. It's like we're getting in on the ground floor.
We're like research buddies.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what makes our deep dive really exciting, because we're about to explore some specific examples of how this organization is empowering individuals and communities.
Okay, you've definitely got my attention. Let's dive into those examples and see how Lazismu is putting this whole Dakwah by action philosophy into practice.
Let's do it.
Right.
Before we jump into those examples,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's worth, taking a moment to just appreciate how holistic Lazismu's approach really is. Like, they're not just addressing material needs.
Yeah.
They're also like cultivating this sense of shared values, community.
Yeah, it's not just like, here's some money, good luck. It's like, they're walking alongside people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're doing it in a way that really resonates within the local culture. Indonesia is a predominantly Muslim country, so weaving faith into these programs, it's not just like a nice add-on, it's fundamental to their effectiveness.
Yeah, it's like speaking the language.
Yeah.
So how does that actually like play out? Like on the ground, what's a concrete example of that?
Okay, so imagine a young woman, she's received a microloan to start, let's say, a food stall.
Okay, okay.
Now, alongside that financial support, she's also invited to these workshops where they discuss Islamic teachings on honesty in business, fair pricing, even using a portion of her profits to help those less fortunate.
So it's not just like be a good businesswoman. It's like be a good businesswoman, but also think about your community.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, make a profit, but do it in a way that benefits everyone.
Precisely. It's about creating this ripple effect of positive change.
Yeah.
Now, the research proposal, unfortunately, it doesn't really give us like a ton of details about specific success stories or like the nuts and bolts of how these programs actually work.
Yeah, I was getting ready to hear about like, this specific person whose life was changed. But I guess, that's kind of how research goes. It's all about laying the foundation.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, we can still make some educated guesses,
Right.
right? Based on what we know about Islamic charitable practices, the Indonesian context.
Yeah.
So, for example, with their health initiatives, they might offer counseling on family planning, but through a lens that aligns with Islamic teachings.
Oh, okay.
Or they might run workshops on preventing the spread of diseases, but incorporating, faith-based messages about hygiene and community well-being.
Yeah, meeting people where they are, using language they understand.
Exactly.
That's smart.
And remember how we were talking about them expanding the concept of Ibn Sabil to include students?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, that could mean providing scholarships, even just school supplies to kids who couldn't otherwise afford them.
So a family that's, maybe about to pull their kid out of school because they just can't afford it.
Yeah.
And Lazismu steps in, and suddenly that kid can stay in school.
Exactly. And I'm sure their support wouldn't end there, right? They might even offer mentorship or tutoring to make sure those kids actually succeed.
This is all so impressive, but I have to wonder, are there any downsides to this approach? Like, is it possible for an organization to be too focused on integrating their religious beliefs?
That's a great question, and it brings up a really important point, the potential for exclusion, right?
Yeah.
Lazismu is operating within a very specific cultural and religious context.
Right.
So the question is, how do they ensure that their services are accessible to everyone in need, regardless of their faith?
Yeah, because Indonesia, it's a Muslim-majority country, but there's still people of other faiths.
Right.
And even people with no faith.
Of course.
And they deserve help, too.
Absolutely. And to be fair to Lazismu, the proposal doesn't really delve into this whole inclusivity thing.
Yeah.
So we can't assume they're, doing it perfectly or even adequately.
Right, right.
But it's definitely something to consider as we evaluate the effectiveness and the ethics of their model.
Yeah, it makes me think about that balance between, promoting your values, but also being open and welcoming to everyone.
It's a tricky one, and I think that's where further research would be really valuable.
Yeah.
It would be fascinating to see how Lazismu addresses this challenge.
Yeah.
And how their Dakwah by action approach resonates with those outside the Muslim community.
Okay, so we've got this organization doing this incredible work, empowering people on multiple levels, but there's this potential tension between their faith-based approach and the need for inclusivity.
Right.
What else should we be kind of like thinking about as we analyze Lazismu's model?
Well, one practical concern that comes up with any charitable organization is sustainability, right?
Yeah, how do you keep the lights on?
Exactly. How do you keep the funding coming in?
Yeah, all this good work doesn't come cheap.
No, it doesn't. And the research proposal mentions that Lazismu relies heavily on zakat.
Okay.
Which is, a form of almsgiving that's obligatory for Muslims.
Okay.
It's essentially like a wealth tax that's meant to support the poor and needy.
So their funding model is built right into their faith.
Exactly. It's pretty clever.
Yeah.
But it also raises questions, right? About long-term stability. Like what happens when there's like an economic downturn?
Yeah.
When people have less to give.
Can they keep going?
Yeah. Can they diversify their funding sources to weather, any storm that comes their way?
Yeah, that's a big question, and it leads to another big question. How do you measure the impact of all this work?
Oh, that's the big one.
Yeah.
It's a challenge for any organization, trying to tackle complex social issues.
Yeah.
It's not just about counting, how many microloans you've given out or how many kids you sent to school.
Right. It's about those ripple effects.
Exactly. The long-term transformations,
Yeah.
the overall well-being of the community.
Yeah. How do you measure hope?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where things get tricky because it often requires, qualitative data, in-depth interviews, long-term tracking.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's time-consuming. It's resource-intensive.
So while Lazismu's Dakwah by action strategy, it seems really promising.
Yeah.
There's still these big questions about inclusivity, financial sustainability, measuring impact that still need to be addressed.
Yeah, and those are exactly the kinds of questions that researchers are starting to explore.
Yeah.
What we're seeing with Lazismu's Muse, it's like this potential model for a new kind of development work,
Okay.
one that's deeply rooted in faith, in community, and a holistic understanding of human needs.
Okay, so we've unpacked the what and the how of Lazismu Makassar.
Right.
But the bigger question is, so what? What can other organizations, even those outside of a religious context,
Yeah,
learn from their approach?
that's where our deep dive gets really fascinating because while the specific religious framework might not be transferable to every context,
Right.
I think the underlying principles of Lazismu's work, they hold valuable lessons for anyone who's, interested in creating meaningful and sustainable change.
So we've been digging into this Lazismu Makassar group and their whole Dakwah by action thing, using faith to actually solve problems.
Yeah.
But what about the rest of us? I mean, what if you're not religious? Is there something here for everyone?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
At first you might think, well, good for them, but that's not how I do things.
Right, right.
But I actually think there's some universal stuff here, principles anyone can use.
Okay, I like where this is going. Lay it on me. What are the big takeaway?
Well, the first one that pops into my head is you got to think holistically.
Okay.
Lazismu gets that you can't just address one part of someone's life and expect everything to be fine.
Right.
They're tackling what? Economic problems, health, education, even spiritual well-being, all at once.
It's like the give a man a fish, teach a man to fish thing.
Oh, exactly.
But they're going even further. It's not just the skill, it's the fishing rod, the bait, heck, maybe even a boat,
That's a great way to put it. Real empowerment needs that multifaceted approach.
Yeah.
And that leads to the second big thing, values-driven action.
Okay.
Now, you don't got to be religious to have values.
Of course not. Everyone's got something they believe in, whether it's integrity, compassion, or just wanting to do good for the world. Those are values.
Exactly. And Lazismu shows us when your work has that driving force behind it, it hits different.
It's not just a job, it's a mission.
Uh-huh.
Right.
It connects with people on a deeper level. They get inspired to make change themselves.
It's like instead of just donating to charity, you're getting your hands dirty, really making a difference.
Exactly. And that brings us to another lesson. Long-term vision.
Okay.
These guys aren't into quick fixes. They're investing in people's futures, giving them what they need to stand on their own 2 feet.
It's not about putting out fires, it's about fireproofing the whole building, so to speak.
Right. And that requires a mindset shift from charity to empowerment.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
asking, how can we make a change that lasts, that helps individuals, but spreads out to whole communities?
And that's where that whole community engagement piece comes in, right? We
How
talked about how LA's SM is really plugged into the community they're serving.
Big time. They're not some outside group coming in and telling people what they need.
Yeah.
They listen. They work with local leaders.
Yeah.
They adapt their programs to fit the people and the culture.
Because sometimes the best answers come from the people who are actually living it, right?
Absolutely. You got to recognize the wisdom and strength that's already there
Right.
and find ways to support that.
And that takes us to what might be the most important takeaway of all.
Hope. Yeah.
LAZSMU isn't just giving stuff, they're giving people a sense that things can get better, that they have the power to change their lives.
When people feel empowered, when they believe in a better future, that's when you see real lasting transformation.
Yeah, it's like you give someone food, they eat for a day, you give them hope, they can conquer the world.
Exactly. And that's something we can all learn from, religious or not. It doesn't matter if you're working at a big company, volunteering, or just talking to your neighbor. You can bring that spirit of empowerment and hope to everything you do.
So big picture, Lazismu's showing us it's not just about handouts, right?
Yep.
It's about this whole approach, material support, values behind your actions, thinking long-term, working with the community, and most importantly, believing that things can get better.
And those lessons, they can change individuals, communities, heck, even the whole world.
Wow. That's pretty powerful stuff to think about.
It is.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired. Like, what can I do differently? How can I make a difference?
Me too. This has been a great deep dive.
It really has. Thanks for joining us as we explored Lazismu Makassar and their Dakwah by action way of doing things.
My pleasure.
And until next time, keep on learning, keep on diving deep, and keep on making the world a better place.